Hi, I'm Byron Rhodes and this is my YouTube channel. So for this video, I'm going to be doing a drawing for somebody I admire. It's actually Gary Vaynerchuck, an entrepreneur that I consume his content. I really like the things he says, and I try to follow them as much as I can. And really, I'm trying to do this drawing, and honestly, it's me hoping to get some exposure from Gary. That's just the honest truth. But really, like, I didn't want to be just an artist that like just did an artwork and just sent it to him and it had no meaning to him. So I really was trying to think of how I could bring him value, because he's always talking about bringing people value. And one of the things I was thinking of was just illustrating some of his stories. Yeah, he's got a lot of good stories of when he was a child, and he had that entrepreneurial spirit since he was a young kid. And he has lots of those stories, so I figured, well, why not draw some of those? So this drawing is the one of the ideas I had for a drawing to give to Gary Vaynerchuck, and I'm hoping I can find a way to get it to him. But join me as I do this drawing. So Gary Vaynerchuck is a multi-million-dollar entrepreneur. He has a lot of great stories about when he was a young child. Talk about how he had that entrepreneurial spirit since he was so young. When he was younger, I don't know, maybe he was 5, 6, 7, not sure, but he would go to around his neighborhood and pull the flowers out of people's yards and go up to that person's door, knock on the door, and try to sell them the flowers he just pulled out of their flower bed. So I thought it would be a great illustration. So as far as the art goes here, I just start by trying to block things in. And I actually drew him a little bit too old, I think, in this first version. I go back and change it quite a few times and finally land on something that looks a little more around the age of 5, 6 years old. And right here I'm just trying to draw a lady opening her door. And drawing is an interesting practice. It can take several tries before you get it right, and that's kind of something you just have to accept as an artist, is that when you go into a drawing, it's kind of like you just have to accept the battle to try to get things right, and you have to be willing to erase over and over and over again. And I don't think that ever changes, no matter how good you are or how experienced you are. Now, I know that there have been those moments because of my experience that I can execute a drawing quickly, like on the first try. That does happen sometimes, not often though, especially when trying to organize a composition with several characters who have to interact with each other and with a background, foreground, and middle ground. That becomes pretty challenging to try and execute on a first try. So a lot of adjusting, a lot of moving things around, and not even to mention, you got to get their facial expressions right, their movement right, their hand positions and gestures right. So putting that all together, the first try is dang near impossible, and no artist should ever expect that. So you kind of just have to embrace the struggle and be willing to do anything you can to get it right. And here's the point where I'm looking at this going, wow, this is not what I was going for, and it looked bad. I tried to think about tracing over it. Then I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna have to use my light box. So I turned that on and I redo that And I come back and this is what I ended up with. He's a little shorter. His arms and legs are a little more short in proportion to everything else, to make him look more childlike. And I'm much happier with the results. And using those tools and being willing to go the extra mile to redraw things is something, again, an artist just has to accept. So here I begin the inking. I'm using a Pigma Micron number 8, and I'm not using my brush pen. I don't know, sometimes when I use my brush pen my lines get a little bit messy, so I was going for more of a control here. And it's kind of interesting. I didn't completely draw in every feature before I started inking. I don't know, there's always that kind of rushed feeling when you get in art. You just kind of want to get to the final thing before you should. And it's partly just impatience. It's partly you're not sure what you want to do yet. And then it's partly you just want to get to the money part, getting to the ink, the pretty part. So I'm pretty happy with the way his face turned out. It always looks funny in this stage too, because his eye has no color yet. So sometimes characters look a little strange in that stage. So this is little Gary V. I found a picture of Gary V online as a child. He was wearing some Adidas high top shoes and a New York Yankees jersey. So here I'm drawing the flowers below, and then I have a spot for where the flower was dug up and taken out of the ground. And then I got the wagon over there, and I drew in a little shovel so you can see the shovel. Earlier I had the wagon at a higher angle so you could actually see in the wagon, and it made more sense. It made more sense because I could put the shovel in the wagon and you can see it. So I was trying to figure out, oh crap, I kind of changed my point of view and the angle so you can no longer really see what's in the wagon. So I decided just to kind of put it outside the wagon on the ground, like he had just dug it up or something. So it kind of works because it's more of like an immediate, like, oh, he just dug it up, threw the shovel down and turned around and tried to sell her the flowers kind of deal. Originally it was going to have like a roll of butcher paper or something in his wagon as well, something he'd wrap the flowers in. So it's kind of suggested he's carrying that. He's got some sort of wrap around it, so there's something there, but not a minor detail. Viewers probably won't even think of that sort of thing. He's also got a sign on the side of the wagon that says flowers, with the S being a dollar sign. And it's never a problem using a ruler. It's always good to use a ruler if you need one. Not a big deal to not. If you don't use a ruler, that's fine, but nothing wrong with using a ruler. What I'm doing here in the background is I'm drawing the lines, and right before it intersects the foreground characters, I'll kind of terminate the line. That's kind of a technique that's used a lot in pen and ink. It's kind of separate foreground from background. It gives it a little space, because if you just pull that line right up to the character in front, everything tends to kind of get lost. It kind of is almost like as if there's kind of a white outline around the character, kind of making them stand out more. You kind of want to reserve that. I mean, this is my first time using these artist markers. I've used markers before. I had a set of Prismacolor markers. They have the chisel tip. They're not as artistic, I guess, not as organic. These brushes are Ohuhu brushes, markers, and they're super cheap, very affordable, and they worked pretty good. I mean, I haven't used a lot of markers as an artist, but in my opinion they worked pretty fine. And usually my technique with this sort of thing is, well, when I do watercolor, and watercolor works similarly to a marker in that it's sort of transparent. So it kind of works the same. The way I do things, like I'll usually lay down watercolor, let it dry, and then go back in with like a colored pencil to bring out highlights, or to bring out color variation, or to bring in some texture. So that's basically what I'm going to try to do here. So right now I'm just basically laying in some flat, I guess what you would call flatting. Like a comic book artist, they flat their images before they start doing like more of the detailed color work. And that's what I'm doing here. And also because I'm limited in my color range, I believe I have 48 of those markers, and there's not a ton of color options, so going in with the color pencil after laying in these flat areas gonna help with that. Just decided to make all the flowers one color because the story is he dug up these flowers from the ground and would resell it, from these people's yards, and then resell it back to them. Well, I wanted to make it clear that the flowers he had in his hands were the same flowers that were planted down there on the ground. So having them be the same color, I think, kind of helps. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with the background behind the lady. Like, I knew that was going to be the door. So I throw in this blue color because I was like, oh, it could be like a bright, fun colored door, which really works for this because it's a darker color. So she stands out over the top of it. I did look up reference photos for the radio flyer wagon. It didn't have to be exact, but it did have to capture that character so like, oh, that's a radio flyer. It has the black tires, the white rims, and then that red hub. Like, that's like the radio flyer brand, right? So it's a radio flyer when it has that kind of color pattern. The flowers I wrote on the side, it's so funny. Like, I was trying to make it just like kid writing, and that worked, I guess. But just like if you were writing a sign in real life, if you're just writing it haphazard, like you kind of run out of room at the end. That's kind of what happened to me. So at the end, and the thing is, like, the key part of that flower sign is the S being a dollar sign, and I get to the end and like I have to write this little S as a dollar sign, and it's like you barely see it. So that was kind of a bummer. Here's the fun part: going back into that door, showing some dimension. That was really fun. And these gray markers over the top of the already colored area really works well because that gray mixes with the color that's already there and just creates a shadow of that color. It's very effective. And throwing in that highlight of just the top edges of those little indentions in the door catching some light, that really worked. The flowers were really fun to go back in and add some of that purple. It's nice to add a nice fully saturated shadow to an object. I go in and add some shadow to the whites of his eyes, because even the whites of your eyes have a little bit of gray. They're not completely white. Now, if you enjoyed this video, if you got any value out of this, go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and enjoy looking at this finished piece of artwork.